nihilism is a state of not having any moral principles at all, or just saying you don't see the point of them. Why have moral principles? And this is actually quite difficult to explain to people, because obviously if you don't care about society and you don't see why you should care about society, then why should you have any moral principles? And there's something inescapable about saying, well, at the end of the day, you will do whatever you need to do to survive and get what you need to survive, and therefore it is moral to break a few rules here and there when your own survival is at stake. And you can't really disagree with that. But I'm speaking generally when you do have enough to eat, you have a job, but so what moral principles ought you to have when you do actually have food in your belly and a roof over your head and a fairly stable lifestyle? When you are in that happy state of stability and not worrying about your actual survival, then you would have to do more noble things than just refrain from stealing and killing and robbing other people. And I think most of us are in this fortunate position now of having food in our belly and a roof over our head. And when we are in this position, we should be doing what we are supposed to do, which is to submit to truth, logic, and morality. If we don't find ourselves in the position of having to kill or steal and do terrible things in order to survive, such as sell our bodies to the night or something like that. So it would just be a sign of gratitude if we were to submit to truth, logic, and morality and speak the truth as we see it and exercise logic and have a minimum of moral principles such as no high laws. And that would be a sign of gratitude to the fact that we have food in our belly and a roof over our heads, and things are reasonably going reasonably well. So what is the purpose of refraining from lying and cheating and killing and stealing? I would say it's reciprocity. Even if we have no noble feelings that prevent us from doing these things, just the instinct to avoid trouble with the law would tell us that maybe we shouldn't kill people, that even though we hate them, and we shouldn't steal their stuff, even though we would like to have their stuff, and because we don't want any trouble from the law. But basically, nihilists are, I do know a few, they are infuriating. And you think, why are they like that? Some people would say, well, it's because they don't believe in God. That's why they can't see the point of obeying any law, because otherwise they would just be because a nihilist is basically an atheist. It's inescapable that the nihilist would be an atheist, because it is logically impossible to be a nihilist and a theist. Because if you did believe in God, then you would have to accept that you have to. Okay, it would be the Abrahamic God you believed in, and the Abrahamic God with all his attributes would have the power to punish evil and reward good, and this means having a heaven and hell to send good and bad people to in the afterlife. So if you believed in all that, then you would see that you would, you would, if you were being rational, want to avoid hell and want to go to heaven, and this being so, you would follow the rules and not break the law. So, if you didn't believe in God, then you think, well, this life is all I have. Therefore, I must make the most of things by enjoying life as I have the opportunity of enjoying. But this would have the tendency of making people have too much sex, eat too much food, and do things that are actually bad for them, that has already been forbidden by the Abrahamic God, who has forbidden, or at least created a system that tells you about the 7 deadly sins, about anger, pride, lust, sloth, greed, gluttony, and whatever it was that I can't remember. So are nihilists bad people? Or they're infuriating people because they actually have a vacuum where their moral compass should be, and because they don't believe in God, they think that it is smart to not have principles to defend, to not have principles to defend, which means that they will be telling lies and believing in nonsense and talking nonsense, and just not believing in any principle at all. And you think, what's wrong with that? And obviously there's something wrong with that if you married somebody like that, for example, or your friend, somebody like that, or your child or your parent was somebody like that. And worst of all, if your politicians were like that, and it seems that they are immoral liars who believe in nonsense and can't be engaged with because they will avoid your questions, censor you after demonizing and marginalizing you, and by calling you fascist, racist, and misogynist, and white supremacist, and a domestic terrorist because you don't agree with how your country is being governed. So I think you now see the problem of nihilism, which is really something that is contaminating and infecting the upper echelons of our government. The reason why things are the way they are is that they don't even pretend to tell the truth anymore. They don't even pretend it is necessary to not lie, because somehow they are protected. They can talk any kind of nonsense and the media will protect them. So this is why it's bad to be a nihilist. No, I'm not calling myself Muslim, although I do often talk about submitting to truth, logic, and morality, and it is my purpose to position myself as an agnostic, because I need to emphasize this point to so many people who do not believe in God, and I'm saying, well, if you're being reasonable, you would see why there is a moral imperative to obey the laws of God, even though we doubt his existence, because that is the only way to make sure that your society functions reasonably well, so that you don't think that corrupt incompetents are running your government and running your country down, and so you don't get the feeling that your country is a coach whose driver is either mad or dead at the wheel. You want to avoid these feelings, and that is why you pretend to have principles, and you make some show of following your principles, and when you're caught lying, you would be ashamed, and the people around you would be shocked. It's that whole idea of civilization, really. So I was watching a few videos about the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And as we know, all empires fall because there was a moral collapse that happened probably a century or so before the actual collapse of the empire. And it is this moral collapse that, allows the internal enemies to actually overcome the empire. So what we think, this empire fell because the barbarians invaded, or the Japanese invaded, or whatever. If you look at the social history of the empire involved, you'll find lots of clues, like stupid laws, unjust laws, some crazy way of doing things that didn't make sense, other than that some corrupt and incompetent politician said it had to be so for his own nefarious reasons. So even Muslims can ignore their own rules. And this is basically how empires fall. Obviously, to even become an empire in the first place, they must have been doing something right. So when the empire eventually falls, it must be because they broke their own rules. They didn't do the thing that made them successful. They went against it. They did a different thing. And so it seems quite straightforward after all. Even though, if you want to learn the history of the fall of the Ottoman Empire or the fall of the Roman Empire, you'll find, screeds of history and dates and characters and reforms and wars and all kinds of things. But really, it can be understood mainly as a failure of government. So government isn't just about laws, it's about who you put in charge of the government. And obviously you should put the best people in charge of the government, and therefore all healthy societies would have the best people in charge. And the best way of ensuring that the best people in charge is to reward people who do the right thing. And if your laws don't reward people for doing the right thing, then they'll do the wrong thing. So you could, in theory, have laws that are supposed to reward the right kind of behaviour, but if you don't enforce it, then it might as well not be there. So it's not as simple as saying, these laws, the fact that the laws are there on paper is enough. You need to make sure that it's enforced, and that is enforced fairly and equally and evenly, and then you have a healthy and functioning society governed by the rule of law. And what is the rule of law but, well, just people obeying the rules? So when politicians don't obey the rule of law, such as cheating at elections, stuffing ballot boxes, stealing the election blatantly from under our very noses, for example, then we know that the rule of law is breaking down. And obviously, when people do these things, they think they're going to get away with it. And they might get away with it for, a few months, a few years, and then the whole thing will also collapse. Because what happens when people do these things is that they completely ignore the spiritual aspect of the perception of those governed of the government. Because it will change people's behavior. So if a child used to trust its parent and loved its parent, stopped trusting its parent and stopped loving its parent, then it will behave in a markedly different way. And the parent will notice, and then there will be, well, I guess, a kind of mutually exacerbating behavior of the child hating its parent more and distrusting its parent more, and the parent doing more things to make the child hate it and distrust it, until eventually maybe they'll kill each other or something. So these spiritual matters have an influence on group behavior. And so when we talk about moral principles, we are talking about the moral basis of our laws. And when we talk about what moral system our laws are based on, we can, of course, be talking about, well, any number of moral systems, and I do include, as well as religions, secular political ideologies, because, whatever we think of the French revolutionaries, we can, I think, understand why people would want to be free, would want to enjoy liberty, and would want to enjoy equality before the law, as well as, the brotherhood of man, even if they didn't know that these three things would be mutually incompatible and conflict with each other. So if you want equality, you'll be fighting with your brother, because you think you'll be as good as him as he is, and you're not going to take any nonsense from him. And that's why Confucius had it right when he talked about how we are to behave. Or, well, he didn't even talk about women. He just said, a man must know how to behave towards his ruler and towards his father and his elders, and this would include how he would treat his elder brother and his younger brother, and there would be markedly different ways of how you treat them, including forms of address. And these ways are to ensure that we know who we're talking to and who we are and our place in society. And this, I know, is terrifying to liberals who want to think that they're equal to everyone. But doesn't it make it difficult to know how to behave? How would you feel if your boss had, I know it's often, the case now, you call your boss by their first name, but this might be, quite confusing, because, if you're calling your boss by his first name, then you might forget yourself and treat him like an equal, and that would be fatal to your employment or your chances of promotion. So having to call him Mr. whoever or Sir or whatever will just remind you, how, remind you not to forget yourself, basically. So the logical extension of what I'm saying is that, it will lead to a horribly formal society where it's like the military and you have to call, yeah, it would be a bit like the military in the sense that it would be hierarchical. But then you would have accountability and you would be able to swiftly identify who is the weakest link as the person who didn't follow orders or didn't pass on orders, and then you'd have um, a system whereby you would be able to identify problems quickly and solve them quickly. But under our system of matriarchy, we unfortunately have this crazy system where the most powerful person would be, well, I guess, the sexiest person. And then they are no longer sexy because they get old and ugly. And then somebody else and the thing is, they don't actually know that they are, currently the most powerful person because people never do know that they are, supposed to enjoy privilege because people might accuse you of enjoying all kinds of privileges when actually you feel the victim of all kinds of things. For example, white men who are often accused of enjoying white privilege, and when maybe they're feeling rather victimized by things. So our subjective feelings are really no guide whatsoever to the true state of affairs, which is to be regarded in a regarded as a macrocosm of culture and law. So back to the question of whether I regard myself as Muslim. I suppose I could be regarded as Muslim if it is considered Muslim to submit to truth, logic, and morality. And I do go on to say that it is, well, I do say that it would be moral to obey what are believed to be God's laws, even though we doubt his existence. So I'm not sure if that makes me a Muslim or not. I think I should be a little ambiguous simply because it is more politic to be so. And also, I need to emphasize that it is possible to arrive at theocracy by reason alone. And I hope you have been able to understand my chain of reasoning about why it is necessary to restore the patriarchy so that we have a hierarchical society where accountability will be given to our leaders. So they stay there, they are in charge, and if anything goes wrong, they are to blame, and they're not forever passing the buck. I have already explained that, a lot of crazy things can be hidden by a majority. So we don't know who who exactly said gay marriage should be legalized. But we know that it kind of spread around the world, the Western world anyway, like it was prearranged, preordained, or even ordered. Um, so it did come from somewhere, and obviously these orders were followed throughout the Western world. And but we don't know who actually issued the order. Will we ever know the name of the person who said we should legalize gay marriage. In the UK, I don't think it was Cameron's idea. He was just following orders. Who issued the orders? I'm sure it came from somewhere in America, but which American, which deep state operative proposed that? We don't really know. But if the British had a caliph, for example, um, just imagine that instead of Cameron, we had a caliph. And the caliph, imagine what would happen if the caliph said, well, I'm going to legalize gay marriage now. Um, and obviously all the Quran reading Britons would say, how dare you? It's heresy. It's not Islamic. It's not in the Quran. It's actually a sexual offence, and you're going to allow sex offenders to marry each other. No way. We're going to get rid of you. And then it would never have happened, would it? So you see how these rules would actually protect you from all kinds of incompetent and cowardly and corrupt politicians. So I think it's necessary for me to continue emphasizing how how much better things would work if you followed a moral system that has clear rules in a book that most people in the world would have heard about, thus giving it a status above, well, any book that I might have written, even if it did become a bestseller. So basically, the Quran is on par with the Bible, and the Bible contains the Torah, which is supposed to come from the most powerful God conceivable, and the Quran is just the Gentile version of it in a second and final revelation. It seems obvious to me that we should trust in this rule book more than we should trust in our incompetent and corrupt politicians to govern us properly. I'm prepared to argue with anyone on the subject. And I don't even have to believe in God, because all the arguments are there. And that there's not even any need for God to actually exist. It is enough that the concept of God exists because so many people already want to believe in him, and they want to believe in him in the way that children want to believe in Santa. So this is one of the mysteries of life, and I think this is something atheists and theists could actually agree on, because even atheists would have to say that the law is necessary to stop people from doing undesirable things to each other or to society at large. So if the law is the only thing that limits our immorality, then obviously we would want there to be a moral basis to our laws, i.e., laws that are supposed to be for the greater good, whatever this means. So for Muslims, they would say, the greater good of the Ummah, and for Christians, they would say the greater good of Christendom. Or if they're not really thinking about Christendom, then they would be thinking, more in smaller groups. So obviously, Christendom is, different countries who are Christian, and we know that the problem with these Christians is that they like to go to war with each other because they started the First and the Second World War, and before that they had the European Wars of Unification, and then before that they had the Napoleonic Wars, and before that they had the Wars of the Reformation, aka the European Wars of Religion. And basically they're very warlike people, and that explains why they managed to acquire three global Christian empires. But Christianity obviously can be broken down, as I was explaining to you, into different Christian nations fighting each other. And while we ourselves have different badges of identity, of being a particular age, a particular sex, a particular class, marital status, or religion, or nationality, we use these different badges of identity according to circumstances. And so when it's not enough to be, okay, this is all about groups. So obviously the biggest group we can have is our religious group, Hindu or whatever, and then the smaller group would be nationality, and then an even smaller group would be, if you want to secede, if you're an American and you're a Texan and you want to secede from the Union, you are kind of, threatening the idea of the nation that is America, because you have a different idea of nationality. And then you'd have regional differences, and then we might have, until we go right down to the personal level of having disputes with our neighbor, disputes with our family. And so it's all about what we're trying to achieve at the time. So I'm saying that our biggest group, in practical terms, would be our nation, because it's still the biggest group that is. Well, it's a group that is big enough to matter, but small enough to care. That kind of idea. And if you do care about your nation and its future, and you want your government to govern in a national interest, then you would accept that it is necessary to the national interest to have the correct moral system on which to base your laws, so that the people in your fellow citizens in your nation would have would know the correct way to treat each other, and and also who should be leader, and the terms of the leadership, and separation of the different parts of the state. So if you think in terms of the absolute dictator who let's say that he's a law unto himself, he can make up laws as he go, he just as he wishes, and he can change his mind today about the same thing. I mean, okay, he can decide on a different punishment for the same crime on a different day. So you don't want that. You want the rule of law. You want the law to be, applied consistently. You don't want to, not know if you're going to get a fine for doing the same thing one day, and and for doing exactly the same thing. The next day, you're going to get your head chopped off. You don't want that. You want some, consistency of application of the law and the punishments associated with the breaking of it. So, if you have an absolute dictator who is a law unto himself, then you would be subject to arbitrary justice, and therefore you want some semblance of having some rules, so you can know how to behave towards the ruler. Let's say he's a tyrant, and you just want to get through the day without having without being thrown into the dungeon, or having terrible punishments meted out on you. So you need some idea about how to behave, and that's why you need rules. So if you have a rule book such as the Quran, then you kind of spread the power. So you don't concentrate all the power in the absolute dictator. So the absolute dictator, if he agrees to be caliph, would become a constitutional dictator, and he has the power of life and death over his people, provided he follows the rules of the Quran. So that seemed to me to be fair enough, and this is really what government is all about. We try to solve problems by changing the rules. So if there's a problem with certain people's behavior, then you kind of want to reprogram these people, and that's why I say that laws are the algorithms of people. So if you want to change people's behavior, you don't want them to litter, and the reason why they littered was because there was no law against it. You make a law against it, so people stop littering. And if you want them to start littering again, then you repeal that law. So it's really in a way as simple as that. Why can't we do this at the moment? We can't do this because our governments are just not responsive to our needs. They instead of governing us properly, it actually doesn't care about us, and the people in charge only want to feather their nests, and for some reason they just don't care. And you can't reach them, you can't have a dialogue with them. In fact, you can't have a dialogue with many people who are mostly half mad anyway. So the other thing I wanted to say is this idea of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is about changing the beliefs of people so that they change their behavior. And what is theocracy but national cognitive behavioral therapy? It is really the national reprogramming of the algorithms of the nation.